Maps show us where we are and how to get somewhere else, as they help not only to navigate, but also to locate oneself. Maps are not only tools for designing physical space, they also create mental, virtual, and political spaces. So the making of maps often connects to and reproduce authoritarian regimes and colonial Eurocentric approaches to the world. So the philosopher Michel de Certeau claims that the bird's eye perspective creates a fiction of knowledge. However, it can also be claimed that maps and mapping practices have an emancipatory potential. So countermapping can be a strategy to visualize narratives and relationships which are not obvious at first sight. This map is from 1899, made by the sociologist, socialist, and civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois, investigating land ownership in the state of Georgia, US. Property ownership is fundamental for how lives are organized. But this fundamental condition is not one that is obvious or visible when walking through the city, right? When the owner is made visible, it's normally on his or her terms. So that's a problem, that knowledge about finance and ownership is reserved for only a few narrow layers of society, so difficult to grasp and to understand and access. So here, mapping the unjust city see aesthetic and visual practices as an opportunity to communicate, as not just political art, but hopefully, or rather, hopefully it's a collective practice claiming our right to the city. Many Stockholm suburbs are planned according to the ABC urban planning scheme. So during the Millennium program, public houses construction projects in the 60s and 70s, these suburbs were built as nodes around each subway station, where you have your A, arbete, job, B, bostad, home, and C, centrum, local centers or square. So with the shift in political governance and the growing influence of the neoliberalism, state and publicly owned spaces, housing and welfare services were quickly sold out and privatized. For example, in 2007, 10 of these local centers were sold to a British venture capitalist called Boltby, together with their partner Lehman Brothers. So we were considering the visual language of the map and how to relay the information about the new owners. We were interested in understanding and exposing the consequences of the changes in ownership and how it affects the activity and the usage of these spaces. So along with the gentrification and the brutal clearances affecting housing situation and in these suburbs, the local centers were particular hotspots for attracting these venture capitalists and big-time real estate investors. So we wanted to see how the new owners and those managing these spaces related to our civil rights. So in politics, a litmus test can be done to test a political attitude. For example, a judge. So we decided to do a litmus test to the center owners and to check what do they know about our right to demonstrate. So basis. In the Swedish constitution, we have the right to meet and demonstrate. So this law is regulated, as you see, under the traffic violation law. So as long as you do not disturb traffic, spread diseases, or disturb the general order, you even have the right to demonstrate without a formal permit application. And public land in the zoning plan is always public space. Although the centers were sold, the area, the territory, remains labeled as public space in the zoning plan of the city. Public land in the zoning plan is always public regardless the owner. So indoor areas that are regularly trafficked, such as malls or marketplaces, during their opening hours, if it's public land, it's still a public space. The police do not have the right to deny the permit, but also the owner cannot say, no, you cannot demonstrate here because we have a, event. So to test this principle, we created an email account under the name MDGH against global homelessness in Swedish, and emailed all these owners of the shopping centers saying that we want to plan a demonstration in your mall. So we got some sketchy answers. They either didn't really know how to, or want to know how to act, act as a public space or take that responsibility. So out of all the emails we sent out, only 2 had given the correct guidelines on how to manage such a request, which would be contact the police to get a permit. So the response, shows a lack of competence and of upholding our civil rights, and therefore also challenges our democratic voices in these spaces. In an early version of the map, we showed the logos of the companies, a picture of the owner, and information box about the struggles that followed the change of ownership. So rather than, once again, gathering and highlighting histories of the victims of privatization, sanitization, and securitization processes, we wanted to highlight a segment which is often hidden in discourses about the segregated city. To actually identify and show the image of the company owners was a strategy of making them visible and thus accountable. The portrait of several old white men on a map has a strong visual effect, right? So simultaneously, we acknowledge that by highlighting these individuals, there's a risk of attributing the problem on an individual or personal level, which is problematic as well. So for this reason, we have, in most cases, presented our map with ownership represented by the company logotypes. So ownership is, and its consequences, have changed over time, and some center properties, have changed owners several times just in a few years, like 6 times in 5 years, for example, in one. So in order to open up a temporal dimension of our mapping, we created a sound piece, which is called Centrumrapporten, which reflects a journey through time and space, reflecting the shifting owners.
Nästa, Norsborg. Inget torg. Centrumbyggnad såldes av Stockholms kommun, exploateringskontoret, till aktiebolaget Botkyrkabyggen år 1985. Aktiebolaget Botkyrkabyggen sålde till handelsbolaget Norsborgs avveckling år 1989. Handelsbolaget Norsborgs avveckling sålde 1/3 till Syrianska riksförbundet, 1/3 till Syriansk-armeniska ungdomsförbundet och 1/3 till Armenisk-syrianska kultur- och idrottsföreningen år 1999. Syrianska riksförbundet, Syriansk-armeniska ungdomsförbundet och Armenisk-syrianska kultur- och idrottsföreningen sålde till Norsborgs Centrum Fastighetsaktiebolag år 2005. Norsborgs Centrum Fastighetsaktiebolag sålde till Botkyrka kommun år 2017.
So one aspect of our work is the question of how to portray property owner in a way which gives adequate knowledge about them as real estate company, their interest, and also their power. So who are these actors owning much of our cities? How can we renegotiate and contest their own imagery and narratives, and how can we unlearn the corporate language and provide a counter-narrative that departs from class analysis? So the counter-mapping processes here thus becomes a practice that reinforces an understanding of the connections that drives the flows of capital. Rather than reading the cities through its north and south axis, with our counter-mapping, it's possible to analyze it through ownership clusters instead. So the utilitarian purpose of the map could be that people suffering from processes of city center privatization and transformation can see that other people have struggled with the same owners in other places of the same city. So rather than inventing the methods of resistance from scratch, give them an impetus to unite.